Hey everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us for this classroom discussion on Afuera, the exhibit, Afuera, Publishing Queer Liberation on View at Printed Matter, and I'll say more about it soon. My name is, first we're gonna introduce each of us. My name is Germán Garrido. I teach at BMCC, the Borough of Manhattan Community College at CUNY. And my research focuses on queer literature and activism in Latin America. Last year, I published a book in Argentina on the writings and activist engagement of Maria Moreno, Nestor Perlonger, and Copy from a transnational perspective.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Mariano López. I'm currently the director of the graduate program and the Isla Fellow in Latin American Art at CCS Bard College. And like Germán, I have done quite a lot of research on some of the materials that you've been seeing here that are connected to the exhibition we are kind of discussing today. And I also published a book in 2023 that basically center queer aesthetics and queer activism from the 60s to the 19th, 2000s maybe. And my research really depended a lot and relied a lot on these materials that we're seeing that we're going to talk about in a minute.
First of all, sorry for my broken English. I learned it on the road. I don't have a title, a career.
Legend.
But I'm here, I'm almost 80 years old. So in my 20s, I was part of the Frente de Liberación Homosexual, Homosexual Liberation Front, el FLH. That now is became history. So I'm here because I want to I want to share with all of you my experience when I was in that group. So that's why I'm here.
Obviously, in case you, of course, you notice already, he's the most important part of this panel. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you. I'm a collaborator of Moléculas Malucas. That was a very important publication online, and I was a part of the staff who made it.
Well, as you know, this talk is on the occasion of the exhibit, Afuera, Publishing Queer Liberation, on view right now at Printed Matter, and we want to encourage everyone to go. It's on view until November 16th, so you have time, but you should go as soon as possible. And that exhibit is really a testament to Juan Queiroz and Archivos Desviados project, which is a militant and activist archival project, I would say. And the exhibit was a collaborative effort at Printed Matter, of course, and it was curated by Juan Queiroz and Hannah Marshall, who is present with us today. And all the production work was led by Keith Gray alongside the curators. First of all, we want to say that we're absolutely thrilled and honored to be joined by Jorge Luis Giacosa, like Mariano said, legend. And I'm going to say your title since you didn't say it, but he's a visual artist, and he was, as you know, a former member of the Frente de Liberación Homosexual in Argentina. So, a part of that history and witness to many things we're going to be discussing today. And, before we dive into the discussion and ask Jorge Luis some questions, Mariano and I thought it would be good to give you some context and share some background about these groups and some of the figures that are highlighted in the exhibit. All of which, is beautifully told in the wall texts in the show.
we kind of insist that you should definitely, if we haven't, go to see the exhibition. It's really amazing. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of care in that exhibition. You can see it immediately. So again, congratulations, Hannah, Keith, Juan, that is hiding somewhere because he's special, and we love him for that. Anyway, this wonderful exhibition highlights the work of three radical, what we would call now, not back then, queer groups, which are the Gay Liberation Front and Third World Revolution in New York, and the Frente, Liberación, Homosexual that Jorge was referring to a minute ago, right? So what you can see there, it's basically a lot of materials that through the years Juan has been gathering and collecting as an archivist and as an activist, right? A really interesting heterogeneous assessment, right? Because it's posters, it's bulletins, it's magazines, we can say, flyers, photographs as well, right? So really, you will get a sense of what these three groups that were different but at the same time interconnected in two different cities, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, how they were interconnected in spite of the fact that geographically they were distant, and this was, of course, not the time of internet, WhatsApp and stuff, right? It was much more difficult to be in touch, but they were in touch, and they made that one of their purposes, right? And one of their belief in what they call back then international solidarity, right? Or internationalism as well. Now, as I was saying, and we mentioned before, this is mostly the work, or this depends on the work of Juan Queiroz, but briefly what Jorge mentioned a minute ago, this exhibition, if you want, was kind of, in a sense, anticipated on a webpage project that Juan Queiroz, together with Jorge Luis and Mabel Bellucci, were, administering, and it was called Moléculas Malucas, right? And this was it's still online, you can check it out, Moléculas Malucas. It sounds difficult, but it's actually very easy. It's almost the same as in English. It's a Portuguese phrase referring to one of the activist groups in Brazil. And it kind of was a way of displaying and making accessible a lot of the materials that today you see in the exhibition. That is another way, of course, of giving us access to these materials that sometimes are in a drawer or in an institution. Here they are there for us to see, right? And one short thing, sorry, I'm making it long, but one short thing that I wanted to say is that one of the things that you will see in the exhibition that is really astounding is that on the one hand, there's very clear investment of these groups on crafting a powerful political message, but there's also a very clear attention to form, because these people were very, very interested in how print, how graphic design, how drawing, how different forms of aesthetic experimentation could somehow strengthen their message and make sure that their message would reach more and more people, especially for the groups that were trying to reach to non-English speakers as well, right? So there's this interface between English and Spanish that is very interesting in some of the materials.
We wanted to, give you a rundown of these organizations, like I said, and you're probably most familiar with the Gay Liberation Front. And as you know, this was an organization, a front, actually, that emerged right after Stonewall in 1969. And as you know, it was, it meant a big break from older homophile groups that highlighted or focused on respectability and integrating into current structures and so on. What set the GLF apart was the way it embraced that radical spirit of that political climate, right? So that was also part of the Black Power movement, the women's liberation movement, the anti-Vietnam War. So, all of that is present in the materials that you see at the show, and of course, very specifically in the work by the Third World Gay Revolution. And the GLF called for a full social transformation, right? It wasn't about just gay issues, but a wholesale radical transformation of our society. Now, the Third World Gay Revolution, I'm gonna call it the TWGR from now on. It spun off from the GLF in 1970, and it was made up mostly by Black, Latino, and Latina, and some Asians, lesbian, and gay men. There were some Puerto Ricans, some Cubans. It was a small group, about 16 people, and there were these two Argentinians that we searched for their traces, Juan Carlos Vidal and Néstor Latrónico, and we're going to say more about them soon. But they fled the dictatorship, Ongania's dictatorship in Argentina in 1968. So they focused on what they call in overlapping forms of oppression based on class, race, gender, sexuality, what they called a triple oppression from the systems of white supremacy, capitalism, and sexism. That's the way they put it, a triple oppression, and those were the systems that they were naming. They were explicitly socialist, and front and center in their fight, of course, was their solidarity with third world struggles happening in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and the national liberation movements, and so on. It was a short-lived experience. It only lasted for 9 months, but it was truly impactful. Some of their materials appeared. Their group really shaped like a part of the gay liberation movement in the early 70s in New York, especially. Some of their materials, as you can see in the show, were published by Come Out and Gay Flames, which was another very radical publication of that time. And they had links with the Young Lords and with the Black Panther Party. Oftentimes we hear about how the GLF, like parts of the GLF had some connections with those groups, and they were really who were that like missing link. That's them. And they connected to Sylvia Rivera and the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. And they came up with their 16-point platform or program, which was modeled after the Black Panthers 10-point program. And I'm going to mention just a few of their points, but one very important was self-determination and bodily autonomy for gays and third world people, which to me was always very interesting, the way they were framing self-determination of the peoples of the third world alongside the self-determination and liberation of the bodies of queer people of the time. An end to the bourgeois family. They were against military oppression, both within the United States and abroad, and they were all for police and prison abolition. They were combating at once the racism that they found in some parts of the gay liberation movement at the time, while they were also critiquing the homophobia that was prevalent in some third world left groups and third world, like they were very critical of Cuba at the time and other left-wing organizations abroad as well. So one of the things I wanted to highlight very quickly is how they pushed for this intersectional approach even before that term intersectional was even there. This was even before the Combahee group, the Combahee River Collective, right? So that was like a very important contribution, I think, of them. And very succinctly about Latrónico and Vidal, they immersed in New York activism very quickly, as you can see, and they gained that very important experience in New York. Juan Carlos Vidal was an illustrator and a designer, and he had this striking visual identity combining like that guerrilla style that you can see in some of these materials with that like very delicate flowery designs, that very maricón, right? That was his blend, that was his trademark, let's say. And Néstor Latrónico and he's still active as a poet and as a photographer. Néstor Latrónico, contributed some of these publications with his poems, texts, and some ideas. And later on, they published a magazine after the Third World Gay Revolution experience called Afuera in 1972, and the show is named after or in homage to that magazine.
Yes, and as we were saying, Nestor and Juan Carlos are also important because a couple of years later of what we are discussing now, they returned to Buenos Aires and they joined a recently formed group that is the Frente, Liberación, Homosexual. And of course, Jorge, interrupt us whenever you want to add something because you probably will have something to say that's more important than what we are saying. So please, go ahead whenever you feel the need. But I wanted to stress a couple of things. So the Frente Liberación Homosexual, and here I wanted to stress a little bit the term Frente or front. Of course, in the GLF you have the same one, and as you know, it's a term, a political term with a really important pedigree and a really important history, right? Down to the Popular Front in France, right, in the 30s, but then in the 60s and 70s, the Vietnamese Liberation Front. So in the idea of a front, of course, there's the idea of a coalition of groups that maybe don't agree on everything, but they share certain important goals and certain important diagnostics of what's going on and how to face what's going on, right? And I feel that this is one of the things we should probably learn today, or kind of remember, if that's a term, today, right? This coalitional spirit, the idea that you can come together with other groups that are not exactly identical, and I stress identical to you, but still you share some goals and you share like an understanding of what's going on and how to face it. Anyway, they joined that group that had been formed in 1971 out of a previous group that was smaller, and the Frente Liberación Homosexual, and here Jorge Luis, correct me or please jump in. One of the things that was very peculiar about it is that was we would say, although the word was not used back then, a gay organization, but this is not correct actually, that brought together people from different backgrounds and experiences, like trade union leaders or trade union activists, intellectuals, writers, poets, students. So really were people from different kind of political and social backgrounds, right? And this became together in this coalition, which was the Frente Liberación Homosexual. Now, when one of them actually that would become really important in Latin America was Néstor Perlonguer, was one of the most radical members of the Frente Liberación Homosexual and would later become one of the most important and refined, I would say, poets and essayists in South America. Another important thing about the Frente Liberación Homosexual is that they also believed in the importance of print and flyers, things that they could hand out. And this is where the connection between the experience of Juan Carlos and Nestor in New York is important to understand in the FLH, because when they went back to Buenos Aires, they kind of, we can say, talk the group into having their own magazine similar to Afuera, right? And this is how the magazine Somos was born, which is a very important publication in Argentina, but also in Latin America, because we have to remember that the FLH is the first LGBTQ, we would say, organization in Latin America, right? And it was influential later in Brazil and in other places. We have some of the, publications, some of the Somos imagery is here with us, and of course it's in the exhibition. But the influence of Afuera is very obvious from a lot of perspectives, and you can see this very clearly in the exhibition again, because you will see that some of the images that you find in Somos were actually cut and pasted from Afuera, so they took elements directly from Afuera and then pasted them into the new magazine published in Buenos Aires called Somos, right? Of course, Somos and the FLH also responded to climate in Argentina at that time, 71, 72, 73, of political unrest and growing authoritarianism. Okay, so, and they were kind of active in that very particular, and I would say threatening context. I don't know if you want to say something about this, Jorge Luis.
I would like to mention, you mentioned Néstor Perlonguer. Néstor Perlonguer is a very important name in our struggle. because he gave to the Frente de Liberación Homosexual the impronta of this his combativity. That's how the FLH was founded on 1971. I was not at the beginning. I got into the group at the end of the 72, beginning of 73. I started working with them, and for me it was very important. I mean, I found a group, un grupo de pertenencia.
He found that he belonged to that group.
Yeah, group pairs. We were all pairs, and for me it was very important to be in there. And I became a friend of Néstor Perlonger. He has a wonderful mind, a political vision. He was a poet too, and he was a very funny fool, a very funny gay one. That's important too. And after I'm talking about the early 70s, the late 60s and the early 70s, and in there, well, we had down there in the Sound and in the rest of Latin America, we have the militaries now and again interrupting the democracy. When democracy came back in 1983 with Alfonsín, so 2 years ago, it was the 40th anniversary of democracy, and we have a big celebration because we were not used to have democracy like this. We were interrupted continuously by the military government. So we have to move. I'm talking about early 70s. We have to move in clandestinity. Well, I was part of the group, and I remember we went during the night with painting, and we wrote in the walls FLH, FLH. That anyway nobody knew what what it was. But well, we're just a few people trying to do the best. And for example, we have flyers, and we went into a bar, for example, and give flyers to everybody and run away immediately. That was the way to work, to do what we could. So that's the experience I would like to share, because now things are so different. I saw so different that I so surprised. I cannot believe it, and it's a pity the rest of my companions in there are not any longer with us, because really things has changed, and finally that small fight that we started on those years, 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, well, got results, and we can see it now, and that makes me very proud.
That's amazing. You said something and we actually forgot to say, and it's very important, that a lot of, we were mentioning the publications, the bulletins, the flyers, they were clandestine, most of them, exactly, right? Produced clandestinely and distributed, right? And we have to and you please share more that, but for those who don't know about this, late 60s, beginning of the 70s in Buenos Aires, it was this climate in which it was not only difficult for queer people, it was difficult for a lot of different people, young people as well, like, you know, people that we know, like friends of Jorge Luis or others, or people of their generation, tell us that even, you know, having long hair would be something that you could be detained and then sent to jail, you know, like it was a constant persecution, right? So there was this climate of authoritarianism and censorship that was prevailing.
Yeah, that was a hard time in there. That was really a hard time. The military was always on power. The censorship, you say, was something impossible in every things. I remember, for example, do you remember the opera Hair? Well, her was in Buenos Aires too, translated to Spanish, and was in Buenos Aires too, and I was lucky to see it, because then it was forbidden, and even the theater set in fire. So it was very difficult to move. We moved in clandestinity, and at the same time, we are looking, at the beginning at least, we were looking to integrate our revolution. We were a sort of revolution inside the revolution, because those years were very revolutionary, 68 in Paris, or the flower power here, were all things, and there we look it as something that's happened abroad, because in our country was impossible at that time. So we have to move in clandestinity, and I have to say that nobody wanted us. I mean, we were looking at the beginning to inscribe, to put our fight inside the fight that all the country were leading for liberation. I mean, but nobody wanted us. I mean, they have any respect for us. I mean, we participated, for example, after the militaries, one of the military periods, we have the Peronism back, and that was very important. And when the first president, that was Cámpora, got in the power, when he assumed his as a governor, as a president of the country, that was May 55, 1973, and we felt with the Frente de Liberación Homosexual that we should be part of that
celebration.
That celebration, yeah, that was a real celebration. The militaries was out, and we have a democratic president, and it was Peronism. So that was very important, and we were in there with our pancarta, with big
flag, yes,
with flag, and we were in there. Well, we were just 15 people among 1.5 million in that Plaza de Mayo, that is the place where all the manifestations were concentrated always, that time, and now it's the same. And then with Cámpora in the government. He made come back Perón from his exile. He came to Buenos Aires, so the matter was to go to receive him in Ezeiza, is our main airport in Buenos Aires. And everything was closed for security, so we have to walk a lot, everybody, lots of people have to walk a lot. But there, that we were all in this sort of march, when the people in front of us realized who we really were, they put it very in the front, and the ones that were in the back, when they realized who we really are, they put it. So we were a sort of island in that march, and that was very, very bad. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. And it was hard to leave this rejection. So when finally we understood that it was unusual,
Useless.
that it was useless to try to get in the political movement because nobody wanted us. That's when the FLH, el Frente de Liberación Homosexual, started working for the community, and that's when this magazine Somos started to appear at the end of '73. And that was important. We handled. We made impression as we could with mimeograph, and we give that to the people in the discos, not hand in hand. That was the only way. It's funny because the discotheques, the gay discotheques, were in the what we call not in the center of the city, but in the conurbano,
In the outskirts of Buenos Aires.
And you know why? Because the police in the conurbano was easier to
Right.
give money. Yeah. So that's how these discotheques survive at that time. And that were the places where we handle the few copies of this magazine that we could do. So that's the story of those years. I was there until the end. I mean, then we have again the military is on power, and that was the worst time, the worst of all. And that was the end of our organization and everything. Everything. That was the worst of all. So, well, I consider, as anybody else who has my age, being gay or not, but I consider we were all survivors, because at that time it was a whole population were suspicious, and they took people now and again. But as nobody respected, we were nothing. So that's why we survived too, because that militancia,
That type of activism or militancy.
and well, for the militaries were not important. we don't we were perseguidos.
Persecuted?
That we were persecuted.
We were persecuted usually not by the militaries. We didn't qualify for the militaries. We were persecuted by the police, as we were before, and we were during the military time, and then in the democratic time also. For us, it was always the same. The police after us. They made razzias in these discos. They made razzias. I remember one, and there were a place that was called Mona Lee, and it was a disco. I was supposed to go that night, but I couldn't. And that night they took 400 people. The razzia made in that place took 400 people. Well, luckily I was not there. But so you can see how was things at that time. It was very hard.
That's something that you were saying that I think it's important also as that reminds me of something that I think it poses an important question for the show as well, and for all of us, like seeing the show and seeing these materials. Because you said, on the one hand, one of the things you were trying to do is trying to see if people on the left or on the national movements like Peronismo were willing to welcome you and you would be part of these liberation movements. On the other hand, you were also working within your own community, trying to kind of talk other queer people, we would say, to join this kind of movement. And there's a very interesting document like written by Perlonger 10 years after the FLH was created in the 80s, when we're already again in Argentina there was a democracy. It's called Historia del Frente de Liberación Homosexual, or the history. He writes a history, having been a protagonist. He writes a history of the FLH, and he claims there very, provocatively, I think, that the experience of the FLH was a failure, right? That's what he says, that it didn't work. But it's very clear for what Jorge Luis is saying, and it's very clear for anybody who sees the exhibition. We cannot think that this is the case. It actually was kind of a spark at the moment that then led to bigger things, but also today it's something we can look at and somehow, interrogate ourselves and our time. So it could have never been a failure, I feel, right? I understand why he was saying that at that time, in terms of their own agendas, what they were trying to achieve. But retrospectively, and especially today, looking at everything they created, being not so many people, like really small organization, but very determined, it's, I would say, the definition of success to a certain extent.
I think it's very important what you say, because it's true. We thought at that time that we were a failure. We were such a few people, and we couldn't get into the political movement. Nobody wanted us. So I consider it was a failure. We consider it was a failure, what we wanted to do. But the years went by, and things has changed so much that in year 2013, with Cristina Kirchner on power, they organized. There were a secretary, a human rights secretary, and they organized a sort of homage to an homage to that group, to this FLH, and they gave us something for the celebration, and well, it's all things that I couldn't believe it, because after lived what we lived at that time, that the same government gave us this recognition. It was great. It was a proof that things changed completely. His things have changed completely, thanks to God. Yeah.
Thanks to the gays.
Yeah, because everything, we have everything against us at that time. But well, that's why now I'm so surprised that everything does. I would have never imagined that those things I was part in my 20s, 50 years ago, so I will be talking about in New York.
You see, this is a message for young people. You never know. Exactly. So also be careful, because you will end up in a vitrine.
The magic of the archive. Yeah, if anything, I was thinking it's the queer art of failure. But yeah, like Jorge Luis was saying, the magazine Somos came at a time where, you know, they had tried to build those bridges with left-wing political and Peronist political organizations in Buenos Aires, but that didn't work out because they were consistently rejected by them. And like Mariano was saying, the magazine Somos, that, you know, was intended to talk more to other gay people, homosexual people of the time. It was, like Mariano was saying, modeled after Afuera. And with that, I wanted to bring us a little back, further back in time, to the Third World Gay Revolution for a second, because I was always very intrigued almost by the way they framed their fight in Third World terms, right? And, you know, that was part of a moment in the United States where the U.S. left, the U.S. Third World left was, you know, quite a big thing at that time, composed of, you know, the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the Green Berets, other Chicano and Asian organizations, and they, you know, were fighting against poverty, imperialism, colonialism, capitalism. And what always struck me was the way that that term, third world people or third world, was functioned, like operated sort of like a glue for them to come together in a unified fight. So it was, even the terminology worked as a way of bringing up this, leading this coalitional spirit that they had. And what Mariano was saying, I think is really important, that the fact that they were more interested in creating a conversation and fighting with a common purpose and for common cause than putting their singular identities at the front and center, right? And what I found fascinating, talking about that glue, was how that solidarity with third world struggles was what brought them together even within the United States. So it was that global horizon that prompted them to come together here in places like New York or you know, the Young Lords in Chicago and so on. And that's how, you know, their internationalism sort of fueled their intersectionalism even before. Like I said, we discussed terms like intersectionalism. So, you know, I was, you know, very interested in that third world framework that they had, and we cannot understand the third world gay revolution without this sense of how many leftists of color of that time were identifying themselves as third world peoples within the United States, and in total solidarity and with the third world struggles at that time, like I said, but almost like as being part of that global community in a way. They thought of themselves as a third world within the first world, right? Mm-hmm. And that I think is a very interesting model to think transnationally about queer struggles specifically, but, you know, any kind of political organizing, the way of, you know, inscribing yourself from a specific location, but within a global struggle. I think third worldism did that at that time. And the Third World Gay Revolution was like the gay chapter, I would say, of this third world struggle that was, you know, very effervescent, ebullient at that time in the US. And to return to Argentina, I was also very interested by what they made of this third worldism in Argentina, being, you know, labeled sometimes as a third world country itself. But in Argentina, it was more about the national liberation that Jorge Luis was mentioning, that was, you know, also in solidarity with other national liberations happening in Asia and Africa, and Peronism and that fight for national liberation within Argentina was thought of as part of that sort of global movement. But one of the things that Mariano and I were also very curious to hear about from Jorge Luis was how at the FLH, the Frente de Liberación from Argentina, they saw what was going on in the US. Because, you know, the way, of course, they were anti-imperialist. So what did they make of that activism that was going on in New York, for example? And one of the things that we can find in this exhibit is that they adapted and adopted some things that came from the United States, from that activism in the US, very selectively. And the thing that they emphasized and the materials that they took were mostly those that were, you know, had a socialist stance, and that, again, were coming from organizations that were composed of people of color and that had that third world framework. But to go back to Jorge Luis, what Mariano and I were curious to hear you talk about is how you, as an activist in the FLH, would see what was going on in the US liberation at that time, and in particular, what impression you had about Néstor Latrónico and Juan Carlos Vidal, who are so important in this show, right?
Yeah, really those two were very important for us. It's a pity that Néstor Latrónico, who still is alive, I mean, is not here. He should be here because this exhibition in printed matter is a sort of homage to those two. And for us was very important. They brought from the States the experience, because they were in all three groups, in the Gay Liberation Front, in the Third World Gay Revolution, and then in the FLH. He was very important. For example, Juan Carlos Vidal was a graphic artist, and in a moment he worked for the Black Panthers, and he explained to them how the feminism, the women, and the gay people and the blacks had the same enemy. And he explained it to the Black Panthers, and the Black Panthers made a paper, and that paper went to Argentina. Somebody translated it, and for me it was very important to read that at that time, because it gave me a sort of international union that we have in this fight. So what they both did was really very, very important. And for the FLH, another was a big thing to have them with experience from the States, and they insist, and that's this, I mean, with a model of Afuera that they published in New York, and we made our small publication, Somos. and there were 8 numbers of Somos of this, so it was a sort of continuity that were important. And I would like to put also on the table that it's very important. How important is the written words, the printed words. So this exhibition and on printed matters that takes all of the documents that Juan Queiroz collected all over the years. Juan Queiroz is a sort of angel who came to the FLH because he recuperate all of documents, and the documents is what stays, you can see, and that's the exhibition, and the exhibition is on printed matters, is very coherent, is fantastic, when in the opening of this exhibition, I was completely moved. I would have never imagined that this one day, these things would be exhibited here in New York, and then it's going to be in LA next year, and then it's going to come to Buenos Aires, and something is that is something I would have never imagined. That's why I'm so surprised and moved.
Yeah, we mentioned this many times, the fact that we can't think of a better place for this exhibit, for a better venue than printed matter. Yeah. Not only because of the exhibits that you usually have, but also by the mere fact that Juan Carlos Vidal and Latrónico would hang there. They would go to printed matter.
Yeah.
So it makes all the sense and comes full circle.
I don't know if we have time for one question maybe, or what do you think? Yes? 5 minutes? Yeah, maybe there's, you want to say something or ask something.
Yeah,
yes.
Over there.
Hi, I'm Raíssa from the Lesbian Archive in Brazil. And you were talking about how things that were made here in New York would resonate there. But I was wondering about how within Latin America was how they were doing that kind of
How they work.
experience some of the same
Yeah.
dictatorship.
Could you
No,
repeat the question?
Like, what was we were talking about New York, Buenos Aires, but what about within Latin America? Dentro de Latinoamérica, ¿cómo había circulación?
¿La querés decir para todos?
So yes, in case you didn't hear, she was asking, she's from Brazil, if I understood correctly, and she's asking in terms of, okay, we were discussing New York, Buenos Aires, what about the intra-Latin American circulation of materials and activism? It's a great question, thank you. I would say, and you can correct me, Germán, as well. Well, one thing that is important is that already Third World Revolution had a strong connection with Puerto Rico, which we claim it's part of Latin America, of course. So that's one thing, right? There's Puerto Rico, and there's this connection. Another important thing I will mention, it's a little later, but it's important, is that Néstor Perlonger, who we were mentioning before, went into exile to Brazil in the early 80s. And there he was kind of very close to the people that founded the first LGBTQ organization in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. It was called Somos, inspired by this journal. So there you have like one very clear, visible thing. I don't know if you want to add something in terms of... There were also, this is also another thing that we know through the archive as well, that there was correspondence between, for instance, Buenos Aires and Mexico. What was the name of the Mexican Frente?
Liberación Homosexual.
Frente Liberación Homosexual de Mexico. So, there were these connections and communications as well.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. We were not. We didn't say gay. Frente de Liberación gay because gay was not used still there. We call us homosexuals. That is more technical. Because we were trying to say in Argentina the word for homosexual people is puto. Puto is a very bad word. And so we were trying to get out of that definition. So homosexual was better. With the years pass by, and some years ago, for example, we have a group that was called Los Putos Peronistas, and I was happy that they reivindicate that diminution that well. At that time was different.
And also in Brazil, you know that the organization Somos, that was also a pioneering experiment, that name was in homage to the Argentinian magazine Somos. So you know, it's very fascinating how these things travel and influence one another.
Yes, and last, because we know that we will be chopped. In connection to Somos, there was this organization called Moléculas Malucas in Sao Paulo, which is from where, like, the web page that has still today online a lot of these materials is called Moléculas Malucas as well. So there you have connections. We are all brothers and sisters. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jorge Luis.
Thanks, Jorge Luis.
No.